The room was silent. Too silent. A man in an orange prison uniform sat with his hands clasped, knowing the sun might never rise for him again. Tomorrow, he would be gone. Fear pressed down on his chest, heavy and unforgiving. He didn't ask for freedom. He didn't ask for mercy. He asked to see his dog, one last time. When the German shepherd entered the room, officers expected tears. What they got instead was terror. The dog didn't run to him. It didn't whine. It froze. Then it growled. In that moment, fear turned into confusion. Confusion into shock. And within minutes, a buried truth began clawing its way back to life, changing everything forever. The fluorescent light above Ethan Walker's cell didn't flicker like it did in the movies. It just hummed, steady, tired, and indifferent, like it had been doing this for years, long before Ethan's name ever landed on the execution list. Cold lived in the walls at Frost River State Penitentiary. It slid through concrete and steel the way regret slid through a man's ribs. Silent, unavoidable, and always there when you stopped pretending it wasn't. Ethan sat on the edge of the bunk with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together like he was holding something fragile. The orange uniform hung on him wrong, as if the color itself refused to belong to him. Under the fabric, a lifetime of habit still showed through. A straight spine, shoulders squared even when no one was watching. Stillness that came from discipline, not defeat. His eyes were fixed on the narrow slit of window high above the door. No view, really. Just a strip of night that looked darker than it should have been. Somewhere beyond razor wire and floodlights, the world was turning toward morning like it always did. Tomorrow, the world would turn without him. The guards on death row moved differently on execution days. Their boots didn't just echo, they counted. Each step down the corridor landed with a rhythm that sounded like a clock. Some men on the row begged. Some prayed out loud. Some cursed until their throats went raw. Ethan did none of it. He listened. He measured. He breathed. In, 2, 3. Out, 2, 3. He'd learned long ago that panic was a luxury. In the places he came from, panic got people killed. Out there was no room for it. In here, there still wasn't. A shadow crossed the small square of glass in his door. The metal slot rattled. A pair of eyes, older, tired, peered in. "Walker?" the guard said quietly, like saying his name too loud might wake up something neither of them wanted to face. "You awake?" Ethan didn't look away from the window. "I've been awake," he said. The guard hesitated. Ethan could hear it in the silence. Some men tried not to humanize you at the end. It made the job easier. Others couldn't help it. "They're doing the final walkthrough," the guard added. "Warden, chaplain, all that." Ethan nodded once. Small, controlled. The slot shut. The corridor swallowed the guard's footsteps. The hum of the light returned to being the loudest thing in the world. Ethan's hands tightened for a moment, then relaxed. His fingers carried the memory of gear, straps, buckles, the weight of a rifle he no longer held. Years ago, he'd owned a single jacket that still smelled faintly like dust and cold wind, the fabric worn thin from use. Faded multicam. He could picture it like it was folded on a chair beside him. He could picture the rest, too. A black military watch, oversized on his wrist, scuffed at the edges. A cap with U.S. Army Veteran stitched across the front, the letters sun-bleached. 2 dog tags that had never left his neck, not even when the world insisted he didn't deserve them anymore. In his mind, he still wore them. In his mind, There was still a weight on his shoulder that wasn't prison cloth. In his mind, there was still Rex. He didn't say the dog's name out loud. Not yet. In this place, names got used against you. Names became jokes, or leverage, or stories other men told to make the hours go quicker. But Rex wasn't a story. Rex was a fact. A German shepherd with a brown-black coat and a body built like a coiled spring. Quiet until he wasn't. Calm until the exact second it mattered. Rex wore a tactical collar, not a pet collar. No jingle, no charm, just a black strap with a stitched patch that read, Rex. Ethan could still see the way the dog sat beside him. Ears up, eyes tracking everything. The kind of vigilance that didn't come from fear. It came from training, from loyalty, from being a teammate. Back then, Ethan never had to talk much. Rex didn't need words. Neither did war. The lock at the end of the corridor buzzed, a soft electrical sound that carried through the wing. Steel slid. Keys clinked like distant rain. This time, footsteps approached with purpose. Ethan stood before anyone told him to. Not because he had to, because that's what he'd always done. You stand when the officer walks in. You stand when the commander enters the room. You stand when the world wants to see if you'll break. The door opened. Warden Harris stepped into the threshold, clipboard in hand, face set in the kind of expression men wore when they believed neutrality was a form of mercy. Behind him were the chaplain, thin, gentle-eyed, and a prison psychologist with a folder tucked to her chest. The warden's gaze traveled over Ethan like he was reading a report, then lifted to meet his eyes. "Ethan Walker," the warden said. Not harsh, not kind, just official. Ethan's jaw flexed once. He didn't correct the tone, didn't ask to be called Mr. Walker. Names had been stripped down to convenience in here. "You will be escorted to the chamber in approximately 2 hours," the warden continued. "This is your final confirmation. You understand the schedule?" "Yes, sir," Ethan said. The chaplain shifted slightly, as if he expected more. A plea, a tremble, some sign that the gravity had finally landed. Ethan gave none. The psychologist studied him with professional caution. Ethan could recognize that look. He'd seen it on base sometimes, in the way medics watched you when they weren't sure if you were okay, but also weren't sure if asking would make it worse. The warden cleared his throat. "If you have any final requests beyond the one already granted, now is the time." Ethan's eyes didn't move, but his breathing did. Just enough that a trained ear could hear the change. "No," Ethan said. "Just the one." The warden's gaze dropped briefly to the clipboard, as if the words were already written there. "We've confirmed your request. The animal will be brought to the holding room adjacent to the chamber. You'll be restrained. The dog will be leashed and supervised. That's protocol." Ethan nodded, slow, controlled. He didn't smile. He didn't let relief show the way most men would. Relief was dangerous. It made you careless. But inside, behind the ribs, something loosened. A knot that had been tied for years. 10 minutes. 10 minutes was nothing. 10 minutes was everything. The chaplain stepped forward, voice softer. "Mr. Walker, are you sure you don't want to write a letter? To family? To—" "I don't have family," Ethan said, and the truth came out flat, not bitter. "Not anymore." The chaplain's mouth opened, then closed. He nodded, accepting what he couldn't change. The psychologist spoke carefully. "Why the dog, Ethan?" It wasn't judgment. It was curiosity. The kind that came when a person couldn't make a decision fit into a normal box. Ethan looked at her for the first time. Really looked. His eyes were the color of storm water. Calm on the surface, dangerous underneath. Not because he wanted harm, but because he'd survived things that didn't leave room for softness. Because, Ethan said, voice low, he's the only one who ever knew what happened. The warden's eyebrows drew together. What happened? Where? Ethan didn't answer the way a man with nothing to lose should have. He simply said, he was there. A pause filled the cell, thick as the cold. The warden glanced back at his team. The chaplain looked down at his hands. The psychologist's grip tightened on her folder. The warden turned back to Ethan. Your request is being honored, he said, firmer now, like he needed to anchor the room. That's all I can promise you. Ethan held his gaze. That's all I'm asking, Ethan replied. The warden nodded once, then stepped back. The door began to close. As it shut, the psychologist's eyes stayed on Ethan for a beat longer than the others. Like she wanted to say something she couldn't put into policy language. Then the steel clicked, and Ethan was alone again. The hum returned. The cold returned. But the loneliness shifted. Because somewhere beyond those walls, a black SUV was already rolling down a winter road. In the back was an older German shepherd with a graying muzzle and a tactical collar that didn't belong in retirement. And for the first time in years, Ethan Walker felt something he hadn't let himself feel in this place. Not hope, not yet. Something sharper. Something steadier. Like the moment before a mission begins. When you check your gear, tighten your straps, and look at your partner without saying a word, because you both understand what comes next. Ethan sat back down on the bunk, clasped his hands again, and stared at the strip of night in the window. Come on, Rex, he whispered, so quietly even the walls might not catch it. Come find the truth. Ethan Walker didn't come home the way people expected soldiers to come home. There was no parade, no crowd at the airport, no long line of hands waiting to shake his. When he stepped off the bus in Broward County, the air smelled like wet pavement and pine sap, and the sky looked too wide, like it didn't know what to do with him. He carried one duffel bag. That was it. Inside were clothes folded the way the Army taught him. A faded multicam jacket worn soft at the elbows, and a black military watch with a cracked bezel that still kept perfect time. The dog tags never left his neck. They rested against his chest like an anchor, cool and familiar, a reminder that something in the world had once made sense. Ethan didn't talk much after the war. Not because he couldn't, but because words felt wasteful. Out there, you learned quickly that talking didn't stop bullets, and explaining yourself didn't change orders. You listened, you observed, you acted when you were told to. That habit stayed with him. He took a small rental room above a closed hardware store on Main Street. The owner asked him questions at first. Where he was from, what he planned to do next. Ethan answered politely, briefly, and never volunteered more than was asked. When the questions stopped, he felt relief. At night, he sat on the edge of the bed with his hands on his knees, staring at nothing. Some nights were quiet. Others weren't. On those nights, his jaw locked tight, his breathing shallow, as if his body was bracing for something that never arrived. That was when Rex would move. Rex had come home with him. Not officially. Not with paperwork and signatures and cheerful send-offs. Rex came home because Ethan refused to leave him behind. The German shepherd was already waiting when Ethan arrived at the temporary kennel outside the base. Older than when they first met. leaner, smarter. His brown-black coat caught the light in sharp lines, muscle still tight beneath the fur. Around his neck sat the same tactical collar he'd worn on duty, black, silent, with a stitched patch that read Rex. No leash jingle, no decoration. Rex lifted his head the moment Ethan stepped into view. No barking, no theatrics, just recognition. Ethan stopped a few feet away. He crouched, not rushed, not emotional, and rested his forearms on his thighs. Rex approached at a measured pace, ears up, eyes locked. He sniffed Ethan once, then again, deeper this time, as if cataloging the man in front of him. Then Rex sat. Perfect posture. Alert. Waiting. Ethan exhaled for the first time that day. "Yeah," he murmured. "I know." From that moment on, they moved like they always had. Together. Rex learned the rhythms of civilian life the same way he'd learned everything else. By watching. He sat quietly in diners, body angled toward the door. He slept near the window, not the bed. When Ethan woke from nightmares, Rex didn't whine or climb onto him like a pet. He placed his head under Ethan's hand, steady and firm, grounding him without demanding anything in return. People noticed the dog before they noticed Ethan. "That thing military?" a man once asked outside the grocery store. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied. "What does he do now?" Ethan glanced down at Rex, who was scanning the parking lot with calm precision. "Same thing he always did." The man laughed, unsure if it was a joke. It wasn't. Ethan found work the way he found everything else, quietly. Temporary security, overnight warehouse monitoring. Jobs that didn't require conversation or trust, just attention and patience. He didn't ask questions. He didn't complain. He showed up early and left without ceremony. Supervisors liked him. They described him as solid, reliable, not the type to stir things up. That description would come back to haunt him. The call came 6 months after he'd settled into Broward County. An unlisted number. A voice that introduced itself as part of a regional task unit coordinating civilian support and site observation. Nothing tactical, nothing aggressive. Just eyes on a location scheduled for decommissioning. A training facility that had fallen off the books. "We could use someone with discipline," the voice said. "Someone who knows procedure." Ethan didn't say yes right away. He listened. The job paid well, short-term, clean on paper. No weapons required, no engagement, just presence. "Bring your dog?" the voice asked. There was a pause. "He's trained," Ethan said finally. "He doesn't interfere." "That's fine," the voice replied. "Actually, that's better." Rex's ears twitched when Ethan ended the call. Ethan looked down at him. "Observation only," he said, as if repeating rules out loud might keep them intact. "No action." Rex held his gaze. The site sat on the edge of Broward County, half hidden by trees and rusted fencing. It looked abandoned from the outside. Inside, it was too clean, too organized, too quiet. Ethan noticed things other people wouldn't have. Doors that had been recently replaced. Lights wired to generators, not the grid. A schedule taped to a wall that didn't match the official report. Rex noticed more. He slowed near certain corridors, paused where the air carried unfamiliar scents. His posture shifted, subtle changes that meant alert, not alarm. Ethan logged what he was told to log. He stood where he was assigned to stand. He didn't push past his role. That night, something went wrong. Not loudly, not in a way that made sense at first. Voices echoed where there shouldn't have been any. Footsteps overlapped, orders crossed. Ethan felt the shift before he understood it, the way he always had. The moment when a routine stops being routine. Rex stiffened. Ethan raised a hand, not to command, but to steady. Then there was a sound. A sharp crack that punched through the air and froze everything that followed. Someone fell. Time fractured. Ethan dropped to one knee instinctively, scanning, assessing, trying to make sense of a scene that refused to line up. Rex moved, fast, controlled, placing himself between Ethan and the chaos, eyes locked on a direction Ethan couldn't fully see. Shouts followed, lights flared, people rushed in. And just like that, the story began writing itself without Ethan's permission. By morning, he was in custody. By evening, his name was everywhere. By the end of the week, the words, "shot a fellow officer," followed his like a shadow he couldn't outrun. They showed photos. They quoted reports. They pointed to his silence like it was a confession. They pointed to Rex, caught mid-bark in a still frame, and said, "Even the dog knew." Ethan said one sentence during the first interview. "I didn't fire." They asked him who did. "I don't know," Ethan answered honestly. "But it wasn't me." Rex was removed before the second interview. Ethan didn't fight when they took the dog. He didn't shout or reach for him. He trusted process. That was his mistake. Because the process didn't need the truth. It needed an ending. And Ethan Walker, with his clean record, quiet nature, and refusal to play politics, was the easiest ending they could find. As the cell door closed behind him that first night, Ethan sat on the bunk and stared at his hands. They were steady. Too steady for a guilty man. Somewhere else, Rex paced a holding kennel, ears up, eyes sharp, cataloging a scent that didn't belong to the man everyone was blaming. A scent he would never forget. The sound stayed with Ethan Walker long after everything else blurred. It wasn't loud in the way explosions were loud. It wasn't chaotic or thunderous. It was sharp, clean, final. A single crack that cut through the air and split the night into a before and an after. Ethan knew that sound. Anyone who had worn a uniform long enough did. Your body learned it before your mind ever caught up. The instant it happened, Ethan's muscles reacted on instinct. He dropped to one knee, not in panic, but in training. His hand lifted, not to fire, but to steady his balance as his eyes swept the space in front of him. The facility lights flickered. Footsteps echoed in overlapping patterns, too many, too fast, coming from directions that didn't match the layout Ethan had been shown. Voices called out names. Orders collided mid-sentence. Nothing about it felt controlled. Rex moved before Ethan finished the thought. The German shepherd stepped forward and angled his body sideways, placing himself between Ethan and the noise. His ears were fully upright now, his spine stiff, tail low and unmoving. This wasn't aggression. It wasn't fear. It was assessment. Ethan recognized the posture immediately. Rex had used it dozens of times before, back when hesitation could cost lives. "Easy," Ethan murmured, barely above a breath. Rex didn't look at him. His eyes were locked somewhere past Ethan's shoulder, tracking movement Ethan couldn't quite see yet. Then someone shouted. Another figure stumbled into view, collapsing awkwardly against the concrete floor. The motion didn't look dramatic. There was no cinematic fall, no drawn-out struggle. Just a body that stopped holding itself upright. Ethan's heart thudded once, hard. He pushed forward without thinking, instincts taking over where shock tried to creep in.
He knelt beside the fallen man, one hand hovering, unsure where to touch, where not to. The man wasn't moving. Around them, the space filled with noise. Radios crackled, boots thundered, light flooded the corridor as more personnel poured in. "Get back!" someone shouted. Ethan raised his hands slowly, palms open.
"I didn't," he began. The words didn't land. Hands grabbed his arms, rough and sudden. He didn't resist. That wasn't who he was. He allowed himself to be pulled backward, eyes still locked on the unmoving figure on the floor. Rex barked once. Sharp, urgent. The sound sliced through the confusion, but it didn't bring clarity. It brought attention. Someone pointed. "Look at the dog!" A camera flashed. Another bark followed, deeper this time. Rex's body lunging forward just enough to strain against the grip of a handler Ethan didn't recognize. "Control the animal!" a voice yelled. Rex wasn't lunging at Ethan. He was trying to reach something else. But in the chaos, that distinction vanished. By the time the medics arrived, the scene had already been framed. People spoke in fragments, half-facts, stitched together with assumptions. Someone said Ethan had been closest. Someone else mentioned his firearm. A third voice repeated it louder, like volume could turn speculation into certainty. Ethan sat on the floor, wrists restrained, breathing measured, eyes steady. He said it once. "I didn't fire." No one asked him to repeat it. The questions that followed weren't questions at all. They were confirmations dressed up as curiosity. "Why were you standing there? Why didn't you move sooner? Why did your dog react like that?" Ethan answered what he could. "I was assigned to that position. I heard the sound and moved. My dog was alerting." That last sentence earned him a look. "Alerting to what?" someone asked. Ethan hesitated. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. That was mistake number 2. By dawn, the building had been sealed. By mid-morning, reports were circulating. By afternoon, Ethan's name appeared in the first internal briefing, attached to phrases like proximal presence and weapon alignment. By nightfall, the word suspect had hardened into something colder. Ethan was escorted into a small interview room with a metal table bolted to the floor. A recorder blinked red. 2 men sat across from him, their posture carefully neutral. "Walk us through the moment again," one said. Ethan did. He described the sound, the movement, the confusion, Rex's behavior. The men nodded at the parts they liked. They paused him at the parts they didn't. "And after the shot," the other man said, tapping a pen against the table, "your dog barked at you." Ethan shook his head. "No, he barked toward you," the man interrupted. "We have images." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Images don't show direction." The pen stopped tapping. "That's your opinion." They slid a printed photo across the table. Rex, captured mid-bark, teeth visible, body tense. Ethan sat in the background, restrained, head turned. The framing told a story. It just wasn't the right one. "You trained him," the man said. "Dogs don't turn on their handlers unless something's wrong." Rex had never turned on him. Not once. Ethan opened his mouth to say that, then closed it again. Explaining Rex to people who wanted an answer, not the truth, felt pointless. "I didn't fire," Ethan said again, quieter this time. They exchanged a glance. "We'll take a break," one said. "Think about what you want to add." They didn't return for 2 hours. When they did, Rex was gone.
Ethan noticed immediately. He didn't ask where the dog had been taken. He didn't raise his voice. His jaw tightened just enough to be visible. "Temporary reassignment," one of the men said, as if discussing equipment. "Standard procedure." The recorder blinked back on. Without Rex in the room, without those watchful eyes, that steady presence, the space felt wrong, hollow. They asked the same questions again. This time, Ethan answered less. He trusted the system. That was mistake number 3. Outside the interview room, decisions were being made at a speed Ethan didn't recognize.
Statements were condensed. Timelines were simplified. Complications were removed. By the end of the second day, the narrative was clean. Too clean. Ethan Walker, former service member. Quiet, disciplined, known to keep things bottled up. A stressful situation, a sudden sound, a fatal mistake. It fit. The press release went out before Ethan had spoken to a lawyer. The headline didn't use his full name. It didn't need to. The trial that followed weeks later felt less like a search for truth and more like a formality. Evidence was presented in neat lines. Testimony was selective. Rex was mentioned often, but never explained. He barked, the prosecutor said, right at the defendant. Ethan's lawyer objected. The objection was overruled. When Ethan took the stand, he told the truth. "I didn't fire the shot," he said. "Someone else was there." "Who?" the prosecutor asked. Ethan swallowed. "I don't know," he said. "But my dog does." The courtroom murmured. Dogs didn't testify. Dogs didn't count. The verdict came quickly. Guilty. Ethan didn't react. He didn't collapse. He didn't shout. He looked down at his hands. They were steady. Too steady for a man who had done what they said he'd done. As guards led him away, Ethan felt the weight settle. Not fear, not rage, but something heavier. The understanding that the truth had been replaced. And somewhere else, in a quiet kennel miles away, Rex stood alert, ears up, memorizing the scent of a night no one else wanted to remember. A scent that would one day matter more than any photograph. Prison had a sound Ethan Walker didn't expect. It wasn't shouting or metal doors slamming. It was the constant, low presence of other people breathing in the same confined air. A hum of lives stacked together, each one learning the same lesson at a different pace. Time moved differently here. Ethan learned it fast. Days stretched without shape. Nights folded in on themselves. The light never truly went dark, and the dark never truly rested. When the guards brought him through intake, the process felt efficient. Too efficient. Like he'd been expected. They took his clothes first, then the watch, then the cap. Someone reached for his dog tags and paused, unsure. "Those stay," the intake officer said after a glance at the file. "Military." Ethan nodded once. When the tags dropped back against his chest, the sound was small but grounding. 2 thin pieces of metal, warm from his skin. Proof he was still himself, even if the world insisted otherwise. They assigned him a number. They assigned him a bunk. They assigned him silence. The first week, people watched him. Not openly, just enough to decide what kind of man he was. Ethan didn't speak unless spoken to. He followed rules precisely. He stood when ordered, sat when told. He didn't stare. He didn't posture. He didn't ask for favors. That unsettled some of them. In places like this, men expected noise, rage, excuses. Ethan gave them none. At night, he lay on his back and stared at the ceiling. Sometimes he counted cracks. Sometimes he replayed the sound, the single sharp crack that had changed everything. He searched it for angles, for echoes, for answers. They never came. The interviews continued, but they were different now, less curious, more procedural. The questions assumed guilt and asked only for details that would fit inside it. Why didn't you call out sooner? Why did you move toward the sound? Why did you bring a dog to a civilian site? Ethan answered the same way every time. Because that was my assignment. Because someone was down. Because I was told it was allowed. They nodded. They wrote things down. They closed folders. What Ethan didn't understand, what took longer to learn, was that the case no longer belonged to facts. It belonged to momentum. Once a story moved fast enough, stopping it became dangerous. His lawyer visited twice before the trial. A tired man. Smart enough. Careful with his words. "They've built a clean timeline," the lawyer said, tapping the file. "Too clean." Ethan looked at him. "Clean isn't accurate." The lawyer sighed. "Accuracy isn't what juries understand. They understand pictures, moments, behavior." "Rex," Ethan said quietly. "Yes," the lawyer replied. "Especially the dog." They leaned heavily on it. In court, they showed the still image again and again. Rex mid-bark. Ethan restrained. A frozen moment ripped from its context and pinned to a wall like a trophy. "Dogs don't lie," the prosecutor said. "They sense intent. They react to danger." Ethan watched the jurors' faces change when those words landed. No one explained what Rex was actually trained to do. No one explained alert behaviors versus aggression. No one explained directional focus, or scent memory, or protective positioning. They didn't need to. They needed a shortcut. When Ethan took the stand, the room felt heavier than the cell ever had. Eyes pressed in from every direction. Expectations wrapped tight around his ribs. "Did you fire your weapon?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Ethan said. "Did anyone else fire a weapon?" "I don't know," Ethan replied honestly. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "You don't know who killed your fellow officer?" Ethan swallowed. "I know it wasn't me." That answer didn't satisfy them. They wanted names, motives, drama. Ethan gave them restraint. When the verdict came back, the room barely breathed. "Guilty." The word landed softly, almost politely. Ethan stood when told. He listened as the judge spoke. He felt the weight settle, not like a blow, but like a sentence already lived. Life imprisonment. Later, when the victim's family demanded more, the sentence shifted. Harder. Final. Ethan didn't protest. That was the moment everyone misunderstood. They mistook his silence for acceptance. They mistook his discipline for emptiness. They mistook a soldier's restraint for guilt. In the months that followed, Ethan was transferred twice. Each place took a little more from him. Not physically, something quieter. The absence of Rex was the hardest part. In the beginning, Ethan expected the dog to appear, expected a handler to walk him past the yard, expected a bark in the distance. None came. At night, when sleep fractured, Ethan's hand moved instinctively to where Rex's head used to rest. It closed on air. He adapted. He always did. He read when books were available. He exercised in the yard when weather allowed. He helped men who asked, fixed a loose hinge, showed someone how to pace their breathing during panic. He never volunteered. He never complained. Years passed. The sentence changed again. Death row. The move felt unreal, like a clerical error that no one bothered to correct. On death row, time slowed even further. Conversations softened. Men spoke to the walls more than to each other. Hope became something you handled carefully, like a fragile object you didn't trust yourself to hold. Ethan stopped counting days. He started counting breaths again. In, 2, 3. Out, 2, 3. The guards noticed how calm he was. They whispered about it. "Doesn't look scared," one said. "Worst kind," another replied. "Means he's already gone." They were wrong. Ethan wasn't gone. He was waiting. Not for mercy, for alignment. The call came 3 weeks before the scheduled date. "You're allowed one personal request," the chaplain said, voice gentle. "Within reason." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I want to see my dog," he said. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Your retired canine?" "Yes, sir." The chaplain cleared his throat. "Why?" Ethan closed his eyes. Because Rex never forgot, he thought. Because Rex doesn't care about stories. Because Rex doesn't mistake silence for guilt. "He was there," Ethan said aloud. "And I wasn't wrong." The request climbed a ladder of approvals. Some laughed it off. Some scoffed. A few hesitated, unsettled by the idea that a dog might carry something no report ever did. In the end, Protocol won. 10 minutes, supervised, restrained. Ethan accepted every condition without protest. On the night before the execution, Ethan sat on his bunk and listened to the prison breathe. He pressed his dog tags flat against his chest and let the memory of Rex sharpen, not soften. He didn't picture a reunion. He pictured a teammate entering a room and noticing what others missed. Outside the walls, a handler loaded an older German shepherd into a transport crate. The dog's muzzle was grayer now, his movements slower. But his eyes were exactly the same. Alert, focused, remembering. Execution days changed the air. Ethan Walker noticed it before anyone said a word. Guards walked a little slower. Radios crackled a little less. Doors closed with a softer finality, like even steel understood the weight of what was coming. He sat on the edge of his bunk, elbows on his knees, hands resting loosely together. The orange fabric of his uniform felt foreign against skin that had once worn camouflage into dust. His boots were lined up beneath the bed, toes perfectly aligned. Old habits never left. They just learned to be quiet. When the chaplain returned, clipboard tucked under one arm, Ethan stood without being asked. "Mr. Walker," the chaplain said, careful with the name. "The board reviewed your request." Ethan waited. "They've approved it." Something eased in his chest. Not relief exactly. More like confirmation. As if a path he'd already chosen had simply been acknowledged. 10 minutes, the chaplain continued. "In the holding room adjacent to the chamber. You'll remain restrained. The dog will be leashed. A handler will be present at all times." "I understand," Ethan said. The chaplain studied him. "You're very calm about this." Ethan met his eyes. "I've had time." The chaplain nodded and left. The approval traveled through the prison faster than Ethan expected. It moved from office to office, from guard to guard, picking up tone as it went. Some called it pointless.
Some called it sentimental. A few called it a mistake. Allowing a working dog, even a retired one, into the execution wing wasn't common.
Animals brought unpredictability, instinct, memory, things the prison preferred to keep outside its walls. The warden convened a brief meeting that afternoon. No speeches, no debates, just logistics. "We follow protocol," the warden said. "Nothing more." Still, unease lingered. That evening, Ethan was escorted to a different cell, temporary, closer to the chamber. The walls were cleaner, the light harsher, the silence heavier. A guard he didn't recognize walked beside him, younger, nervous. "Why the dog?" the guard asked quietly as they stopped outside the cell. Ethan considered the question. "Because," he said finally, "he won't pretend." The guard frowned. "Pretend?" Ethan didn't answer. Inside the cell, time lost its edges. There was no clock, no window, just the steady presence of light and the rhythm of his own breathing. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. He thought about the last time he'd seen Rex clearly, not in court, not in photographs, but on a cold morning years ago, when Rex had sat beside him at the edge of a parking lot, watching a line of people move past without interest. Calm, focused, waiting for instruction that never needed to be spoken. Rex never rushed. He observed. That was what others misunderstood. Somewhere beyond the walls, a black transport vehicle rolled through frost-covered roads. Inside, Rex sat quietly in a reinforced crate, his body still, ears angled toward every sound. Cole Bennett drove with both hands on the wheel. "Easy ride, buddy," he said softly. "Just a visit." Rex didn't respond. He didn't shift. His eyes remained forward. Cole had been Rex's handler for 3 years now, long enough to know when the dog was relaxed. This wasn't that. Rex's posture was alert, not anxious, not aggressive. Focused in the way he only got when something unresolved pulled at him. Cole had read the file. Everyone had. Ethan Walker. Convicted. Death row. Cole didn't believe everything he read, but belief wasn't his job. Handling Rex was. As the vehicle approached the prison gates, Rex's head lifted slightly. His nose moved once, testing the air. Cole noticed. "You smell something already?" he murmured. The gates opened with a mechanical groan. The vehicle rolled forward. Guards watched from towers, their attention lingering longer than usual on the crate. They escorted Cole through a side entrance, avoiding the main corridors. Paperwork passed from hand to hand, signatures collected, rules repeated. No sudden movements. No commands unless necessary. If the dog shows agitation, we terminate the visit immediately. Cole nodded to all of it. Inside the execution wing, the atmosphere tightened. Conversations dropped to whispers. Even seasoned guards stood straighter when Rex passed, as if recognizing something they couldn't name. "That's him," someone murmured. "That's the dog." Rex walked at Cole's side, leash slack but controlled. His gait was slower now, joints stiff from age, but his presence still carried weight. He wasn't a pet being walked through a building. He was a professional entering a space that felt wrong. Ethan heard them before he saw them. The faint jingle of a collar. Footsteps that weren't rushed. His breathing shifted, just slightly. When the door opened, light spilled into the holding room. Ethan stood, chains resting against his wrists. He didn't move forward. He didn't speak. Rex stopped at the threshold. For a moment, nothing happened. No sound, no movement. The room held its breath. Cole expected recognition, a pull on the leash, a wag, something. Instead, Rex froze. His ears lifted higher. His body stiffened, not in fear, not in excitement, but in assessment. His gaze locked onto Ethan with an intensity that made several guards shift uneasily. "Easy," Cole whispered. Rex didn't move. Ethan's chest tightened, not with disappointment, but with understanding. This wasn't a reunion. This was an evaluation. Rex took one step forward, then another, slow and deliberate. His nose worked the air between them. His head tilted slightly, as if aligning pieces that hadn't fit for a long time. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a growl, not a bark. A warning tone that carried more questions than answers. "What's he doing?" a guard whispered. Cole swallowed. "Working," he said. Ethan didn't speak. He kept his posture neutral, open. He knew better than to force recognition. In the field, you let Rex decide. Rex circled him once, careful not to touch. His nose traced paths only he understood. He paused near Ethan's shoulder, inhaled sharply, then moved away. The room shifted. Rex's behavior wasn't accusatory. It was investigative. "Sir," Cole said quietly to the warden, "this isn't aggression." The warden's eyes narrowed. "Then what is it?" "Detection," Cole replied. "He's looking for something." Ethan felt his pulse quicken, not from fear, but from a sense long absent. Hope didn't rush in. It stood at the doorway, waiting for permission. Rex stopped directly in front of Ethan and sat. Perfectly. Still. He lifted his eyes and held them on Ethan's face, not with joy, not with anger, but with recognition that ran deeper than time. The chains between Ethan's wrists felt lighter. Outside, unseen, the final clock continued its count. Inside the holding room, something else had begun. Rex held the sit longer than necessary. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't training. It was confirmation. Ethan felt it before he understood it. A shift in the air. The way the room stopped pressing inward and instead seemed to lean closer, as if listening. Rex broke the sit slowly and stood. He stepped forward, nose low, breathing measured. His movements were careful now, almost gentle, as if the truth he carried required precision. He circled Ethan again, closer this time. The handler, Cole, kept the leash loose, though his knuckles whitened. He recognized the behavior. Anyone who had worked with Rex long enough would. This wasn't confusion. This was recall. Rex paused near Ethan's left shoulder. His nose hovered just above the fabric of the prison shirt. He inhaled sharply once, then again, slower. His ears flicked backward, not in submission, but in focus. Then Rex froze. The room went still with him. A single bark cut through the silence. Not loud, not aggressive, short, declarative, and alert. Several guards shifted instinctively. One stepped back. "What was that?" someone asked. Cole swallowed. "That's not random," he said. "That's a signal." The warden leaned forward. "Signal for what?" Cole didn't answer immediately. He crouched beside Rex, his voice calm, deliberate. "Show me." Rex turned his head slightly, then nudged Cole's hand, guiding it toward Ethan's shoulder. Ethan frowned. "There's nothing there." Cole reached out anyway, fingers brushing the fabric lightly. "Sir, I'm going to lift your shirt just a little. Is that okay?" Ethan nodded once. When Cole raised the fabric, the room drew a collective breath. Just below the collarbone, faint but unmistakable, was a small circular mark. Old. Healed. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. "What is that?" the warden asked. "A puncture," Cole said quietly. "Not a scar. Not surgical. Trauma." Ethan stared at it, confused. "I don't remember." Rex barked again, sharper this time. Ethan's breath hitched. Something loosened. A sensation, like a memory pressing against glass, began to crack. His vision blurred, not from tears, but from motion. The room faded at the edges. He closed his eyes. The holding room dissolved. Cold air filled his lungs. Damp, metallic. The echo of his own footsteps bounced back at him, wrong in a way he couldn't name. The facility, no, the site, was darker than expected. Not unlit, just uneven. Shadows pooled where they shouldn't. Rex walked beside him, silent. Ethan remembered lifting a hand, not to signal stop, but to slow. Something had felt off, too quiet. Then, movement above. Pain exploded near his shoulder, white-hot and immediate. Not the blunt force of impact, sharp, focused. He staggered. Someone was behind him. A voice close to his ear, low, urgent. "Stay still." Ethan gasped. The pressure increased. Something cold pressed deeper. Rex lunged. A blur of motion, a struggle, a shout that wasn't Ethan's. Then the sound, the crack. Not from where Ethan stood, from somewhere else. Another body fell. Not near him, to the side. Wrong angle. Ethan tried to turn, but his knees buckled. His vision narrowed. Rex barked, once, twice, wild now, frantic. Hands grabbed Ethan's arms, not the same ones. "Secure him! Watch the dog!" Someone shouted Ethan's name, but it didn't sound like concern. It sounded like accusation. The memory fractured there. Ethan opened his eyes with a sharp inhale. The holding room snapped back into focus. His chest rose and fell too fast. His hands trembled. "I was attacked," he whispered. Rex stood perfectly still, eyes locked on Ethan, tail low but steady. He barked once, soft, insistent. "Yes," Cole said quietly. "You were." The psychologist who had been standing silent until now stepped forward. "Dogs retain trauma-associated scent memory," she said. "Especially working dogs. It's not emotional, it's neurological." The warden frowned. "You're saying the dog remembers something the inmate doesn't?" "I'm saying the dog remembers accurately," she replied. Rex shifted again. He sniffed the air around Ethan, then turned his head sharply toward the far side of the room. Another bark, this one louder. Everyone followed his gaze. A guard near the wall stiffened. "Why is he looking at me?" Cole's voice hardened. "Because he recognizes a scent." "That's ridiculous," the guard snapped. "I've never been near him." Rex barked again. Twice. 2 alerts. The room tensed. "Sir," Cole said to the warden, "he's cross-referencing." The warden stared. "Cross-referencing what?" "Ethan's injury," Cole said, "and the scent he remembers from that night." The guard's face drained of color. "This is insane," he said. "You're trusting a dog." Rex growled low, controlled.
dangerous. Ethan stepped forward as far as his restraints allowed.
Rex doesn't guess, he said hoarsely. He confirms. The psychologist nodded. 2 alerts indicate direct involvement. The guard took a step back. His hand twitched toward his belt. No, the warden said sharply. Hands where I can see them. Rex moved faster than anyone expected. He lunged, not at the man's throat, not in attack, but into position. Between Ethan and the guard. Teeth bared, body coiled, protective posture. A memory Ethan recognized instantly. "Stand down," the warden barked. The guard froze. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, the warden exhaled. "Remove him from the room," he ordered. As guards escorted the trembling man away, Rex didn't relax. His eyes tracked movement beyond the door. He wasn't finished. Ethan felt it too. That wasn't the one who fired, Ethan said quietly. Rex barked once. Agreement. The warden rubbed his temples. Then who? Rex turned slowly, deliberately, toward the door on the opposite side of the room, where a senior officer stood watching. Too still, too calm. Rex's ears pinned forward, his body tensed. And for the first time since entering the prison, Rex growled with certainty. The sound wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Everyone in the room understood it. The truth had just found its voice. The growl didn't rise in volume. It deepened. Rex's chest vibrated with it, a low, steady warning that carried weight far beyond sound. He stood angled toward the far door, muscles tight but controlled, as if every instinct had aligned on a single point. No confusion, no doubt. Ethan felt the shift before anyone spoke. It was the same feeling he'd known on patrol, when a space that seemed neutral suddenly revealed a fault line. The senior officer near the door hadn't moved. He hadn't stepped back like the others, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't reached for his radio. He simply watched, too calmly. "Call your dog off," the officer said, tone measured. "This is inappropriate." Cole didn't move. His eyes were fixed on Rex's posture. "Sir," he said carefully, "he's not reacting emotionally." The officer's jaw tightened. "I don't care what you call it. Control the animal." Rex barked once. Sharp, immediate. Ethan flinched, not from fear, but recognition. He knew that bark. It wasn't alarm. It was identification. The psychologist stepped forward, voice steady. "That behavior indicates recognition of a trauma-associated scent." The officer scoffed. "That's a stretch." Rex took one step closer. The leash tightened as Cole held firm, but he didn't pull Rex back. He trusted the dog too much to interrupt now. "Sir," Cole said, "please remain where you are." The officer shifted his weight, just slightly, but it was enough. Rex's ears pinned forward, his stance lowered. The room tightened like a drawn wire. "What exactly are you suggesting?" the officer asked. "That you were present," Cole replied, "at the site, or in contact with someone who was." The officer laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You're accusing me based on—" Rex lunged. Not at the man, at the space in front of him. A barrier position. Teeth bared, body squared. A warning that left no room for negotiation. Several guards moved instinctively. One reached for his radio. Another raised a hand. "Hold," the warden said. The officer's hand hovered near his jacket. Ethan saw it. He saw it the same way he'd seen it years ago. The subtle shift, the decision forming before action followed. No, Ethan said hoarsely. Don't! The officer froze. For a fraction of a second, fear cracked through his composure. Rex barked again, louder this time. Final. That's enough, the warden said. Sir, step away from the door. The officer didn't move. I'm not the one you're looking for, he said. This is absurd. Rex growled. The psychologist spoke quietly, but every word cut clean. You're exhibiting stress responses consistent with concealment. The officer's eyes snapped to her. You don't get to psychoanalyze me in my own facility. Actually, the warden said, voice hardening, she does, and so does everyone else in this room. He turned to Ethan. Mr. Walker, did you recognize this man from that night? Ethan stared at the officer, truly looked at him. The lighting was different now. The years had added lines. Authority had smoothed edges. But something stirred. Not a clear memory. A sensation. I didn't see his face, Ethan said slowly. But I remember a voice. The officer swallowed. Ethan closed his eyes, reaching carefully into the memory Rex had unlocked. Low, controlled, not panicked. A voice used to giving orders. Ethan opened his eyes. It sounds like yours, he said. The officer took a step back. That was the mistake. Rex surged forward, pulling hard enough that Cole had to brace. The dog planted himself squarely between Ethan and the officer, stance wide, unmoving. Protect. Accuse. Expose. Restrain him, the warden ordered. Guards moved in. The officer raised his hands too slowly. This is insane, he snapped. You're going to let a dog... The words cut off as Rex barked directly at him. Close. Personal. 2 quick alerts. The room exploded into motion. Guards grabbed the officer's arms, forcing them behind his back. Metal cuffs clicked shut. The officer resisted just long enough to confirm everyone's fear. Ethan watched, heart pounding. Rex didn't celebrate. He stood guard. The officer glared at Ethan as they dragged him toward the door. You think this changes anything? He spat. You think they'll believe you now? Ethan met his gaze. They already do. The door slammed. Silence fell hard. The warden exhaled slowly. We're halting the execution, he said. Effective immediately. Ethan's knees nearly buckled. Cole stared at the floor, hand resting on Rex's shoulder. Good work, buddy, he whispered. Rex didn't look at him. His eyes were still on Ethan, as if to say, we're not done yet. The psychologist turned to the warden. You have a confession pending from the first guard. Now this, and a trained canine identification. The warden nodded. That's enough to open an emergency review. He looked at Ethan. Mr. Walker, your restraints will be removed. The sound of the cuffs hitting the floor echoed louder than the bark had. Ethan flexed his wrists slowly. Sensation returned in waves. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding himself together until that moment. Rex stepped closer. Not all the way, just enough. Ethan knelt without thinking. He didn't reach out, didn't crowd. Rex closed the distance himself and pressed his forehead lightly against Ethan's chest. A single quiet whine escaped him. Ethan's breath broke. Good boy, he whispered. You never stopped, did you? Rex stayed. Behind them, the prison erupted into controlled chaos. Radios crackling, doors opening, commands being issued. But Ethan heard none of it.
He felt only the steady weight of Rex's presence.
The warden cleared his throat. "Mr. Walker, we're moving you to a secure location while this is investigated." Ethan nodded. "Wherever he goes," he said, nodding toward Rex. "I go." Cole looked at the warden. The warden hesitated, then nodded. "He stays." Rex lifted his head slightly, ears forward. Mission ongoing. Outside the room, dawn began to bleed into the sky. Ethan Walker was no longer walking toward an ending. He was walking toward the truth. Morning arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no announcements. Just a thin band of pale light slipping through reinforced glass, touching the concrete floor like it was unsure whether it belonged there. Ethan Walker sat at a small metal table in a secure room that wasn't a cell, but wasn't freedom either. The cuffs were gone. His hands rested flat on the surface, steady, familiar again. The 2 dog tags lay against his chest, cool now, no longer damp with fear. Rex lay beside him, not sleeping, guarding. The room hummed with quiet activity beyond the door. Footsteps, murmurs, radios murmuring clipped phrases. An emergency review had been triggered. Statements were being recorded. Protocols reopened. Timelines re-examined. For the first time in years, the system was moving toward Ethan instead of over him. A man in a dark suit entered with 2 others. One carried a recorder. Another a folder thick with paper and tabs. "Mr. Walker," the man said, offering a nod that carried respect instead of authority. "I'm with the Attorney General's office." Ethan nodded back. He didn't stand, didn't need to. "We've suspended all proceedings related to your sentence," the man continued, "pending a full investigation." Ethan glanced down at Rex. Rex's ears flicked once. Confirmation. "You're saying it's over?" Ethan asked. "I'm saying it's begun," the man replied. "But this time, the truth is leading." They asked Ethan to recount what he remembered, not what he'd been accused of, not what the files claimed. What he remembered. Ethan spoke slowly, carefully. He didn't dramatize, didn't fill gaps with guesses. He described sensations, positions, the voice, the pressure near his shoulder, the timing that didn't align. They listened. They didn't interrupt. When Rex lifted his head at certain moments, the recorder stayed on. No one dismissed it. No one joked. Rex had earned that silence. The review lasted hours, maybe more. Ethan lost track. He only noticed when water was brought in, when a medic checked his vitals, when someone offered him a blanket and he declined. "I'm fine," he said. And for the first time, it wasn't a lie. Eventually, the man in the suit returned alone. "The evidence supports your account," he said. "Combined with the statements we've obtained, the inconsistencies are significant." Ethan exhaled slowly. "We're moving to vacate your conviction," the man continued. "Effective immediately." The words landed softly. No triumph, no rush. Just release. Ethan nodded once. "Thank you." Outside, cameras had already begun to gather. News traveled fast when a system corrected itself, especially when it had failed so publicly before. The warden escorted Ethan through a corridor he'd never walked before. This one had windows, real ones. Light pooled in corners without being trapped. At the final door, the warden stopped. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." Ethan considered that. "I know," he replied. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. Fresh, sharp, honest. Ethan stepped forward, Rex rising smoothly at his side. The dog leaned into Ethan's leg, not from weakness, but from habit. Outside the gate, reporters shouted questions that blurred together. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He stood still, grounding himself in the feel of the ground beneath his boots. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "My name is Ethan Walker," he said. "For years, you were told I betrayed someone I served beside. That story was wrong." Cameras flashed. "I didn't survive because I was louder than the system," he continued. "I survived because the truth waited." Rex sat at his side, still as stone. "This dog," Ethan said, resting a hand lightly on Rex's tactical collar, "remembered what I couldn't. He didn't argue. He didn't accuse. He just did his job." A reporter called out, "What will you do now?" Ethan looked down at Rex. "Go home," he said, "wherever that is." They didn't take him back inside. A government vehicle waited beyond the gate. No restraints, no escort formation, just an open door. As Ethan stepped toward it, a nurse approached, holding a small envelope. "These were found with your personal effects," she said. Inside was a photograph, creased, faded. Ethan and Rex, younger, cleaner, unbroken. On the back, in his own handwriting, words he didn't remember writing. "Where you go, I go." Ethan closed his eyes. Some promises didn't expire. The vehicle pulled away as the sun climbed higher. The prison receded behind them, shrinking into something distant and unreal. Rex shifted, settling his weight against Ethan's thigh. His breathing slowed. His eyes closed, not in sleep, but in completion. Ethan rested his hand on Rex's back, feeling the steady rise and fall. For years, Ethan had lived inside a question he couldn't answer. Now, he didn't need to. Not everything broken had to be fixed. Some things only needed to be remembered. And sometimes, the one who remembered wasn't human at all. The road ahead stretched open. Ethan Walker faced it quietly, with his dog beside him, exactly where both of them belonged.